But LSU, man, they've got some playmakers, and we're going to talk more about those guys, talk more about some keys to the game as well. I want to hear about Garrett Nussmeier. I mean, he's had some ups and downs, and so you're going to have to talk to us about what he's been through this season for the LSU Tigers. We'll do that coming up next here on Locked On Sooners and Locked On LSUers.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Again, thanks for making Locked On LSU, Locked On Sooners, your first listen every single day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Matt, talk to us about LSU's offense. You talked about Jayden Daniels and how there was going to be a drop-off. The dude was heroic, Herculean last year for the Tigers, and you would expect there to be some drop-off, but there's still a lot of skill talent with that LSU Tigers team. So Garrett Nussmeier, he's been really, really good in some games. Where has some of the disconnect been with the LSU offense when they've had that losing streak?
It's been the running game. It's been the running game all year. And it's so odd because coming into this season, we all looked at the LSU offensive line as arguably the best unit in the country. And that's not hyperbole. Will Campbell, the left tackle, is a projected top half of round one type guy. Emory Jones, the right tackle, entered this season as a projected first round pick as well. Now there's some talk about him coming back. Your two guards are both 4-year starters. And then your center is a new starter and a redshirt freshman in DJ Chester. He's the weak link. But when you have two, 4-year starters flanking you at either guard spot, it can lift you up a little bit. So there was great expectation, John. I mean, I don't know if you remember this, but when LSU played USC in the opener out in Vegas, that week Will Campbell said, he made a lot of headlines. He's like, we're going to get in a fist fight. We're not going to go party on the Vegas Strip. Like he said point blank, we are going to run the ball. Got a lot of headlines. And LSU all season is just, it's been painful trying to watch them run the football. Now, Caden Durham, who you mentioned, has been a welcomed surprise because, man, if I go look at all my notes from fall camp, I don't know that I wrote Caden Durham's name down one time. I mean, it was all about Josh Williams as a sixth-year senior. Everyone was excited about Caleb Jackson, the rising sophomore. And, man, it just didn't happen for those guys. John Emery tore his ACL before the second game of the season. And Caden Durham emerged against South Carolina, and he has been a pleasant surprise offensively. But what they've started to do the last 2 weeks, as Brian Kelly has really involved himself more in the play calling, is they've gotten more balance. They had become so overloaded toward the pass that they had abandoned the run. And now the last 2 games, you've seen LSU with a more consistent and balanced approach. And I think it's taken some of that pressure off of Nussmeier. You asked about Nussmeier. The thing about Garrett is, like, if you're building a prototype, that's what it looks like, man. He's tall. He's got the arm. He can make every throw. You'll appreciate this comparison. I think he's got what I call athletic arrogance, a lot like Baker Mayfield, like where, you know what I mean? It's like when he plays for the other team, you don't love it, but you love it when he's your guy sort of thing. Garrett's got that.
Yeah.
I love that. The bugaboo is always the turnovers, man. It's like when that athletic arrogance borders on carelessness, that's when it gets you in trouble. Man, and this season for LSU turned. If you go to the A&M game, I mean, LSU has won 6 straight. They're up 10 points in the third quarter on the road in a battle, the only unbeatens in the conference. You're up 10. You were dominating A&M to the point where they're about to bench their quarterback. And LSU's got a 3rd and 2. Nussmeier's rolling to his left, up 10. Instead of running the ball for 2 yards or throwing the ball into the 10th row, he throws it back across his body, middle of the field, interception. 2 plays later, A&M's in the end zone. And in a blink, that game unraveled. Then they lost to Alabama. Then they lost to Florida, and the whole thing unraveled. So if you want to look at one thing for Garrett Nussmeier, it's to look at his ability to protect the football. And it's not to say to be timid. It's just to say not to be careless.
Yeah.
It's not to say protect the football and take sacks, because he tried to do that against Florida and it cost him. But it's just don't make the play that's going to crush you. And those are the things that have stopped this offense at times this year.
It's huge. It's a huge part of it, because you want your quarterback to sling it. Like if he sees it, you want him to throw it. You just don't want him to do the things that people have coached them not to do for most of their life, which is you're rolling one way, don't throw it back across the middle. That's just very few quarterbacks can pull that off. And unless you know you can pull it off, it's just one of those, you tuck it or you throw it away. And and that's what we've seen from Jackson Arnold too. And when Oklahoma has gotten behind the 8-ball in games, it's been because of turnovers, and not just Jackson Arnold, also Michael Hawkins Jr., the true freshman, whether it was Texas or South Carolina or Missouri, those games changed in a matter of minutes because of turnovers, and it matters. But Garrett Nussmeier is one of the better throwers in the conference because he just lets it rip. And sometimes that's a great quality to have because you don't want a guy gun shy.
He's second behind Jackson Dart in basically every passing statistic. So LSU can sling it, man. Like they've got a bunch of receivers. The one thing they lack is a true vertical threat. Brian Thomas Jr. was amazing at stretching the field last year. He's doing it right now in Jacksonville. I mean, him and Malik Neighbors, y'all have seen plenty of great receivers there. You know what they look like. Like you're like, okay, that's like CeeDee Lamb. Okay, that's a professional football player playing college right now. Mm-hmm. That's what LSU had with those guys last year. And they've got a handful of them this year that are all really good. They don't have the first rounder. Kyron Lacey's their best guy. Aaron Anderson, who's a former 5-star, shorter guy, but they use him in so many different ways. But what they've lacked is the true ability to beat you over the top. And when teams haven't had to respect that, it's made for some crowded throwing lanes, which, man, I think back to, when LSU played Venables when he was at Clemson in the championship game. That was as for about a quarter. Now, 2019 LSU was a pretty good team, as y'all saw. But for about a quarter, that was about as good a job as any defense did in mixing coverages, bringing pressure, and confusing Burrow. And then LSU hit their stride and ended up blowing out Clemson. But I think that's going to be interesting to watch Brent Venables' defense this weekend and how they mix coverages, mix pressures, try to confuse LSU, Garrett Nussmeier, and see if they can force him into some of those mistakes. I mean, you baited Milroe into 3 of them, including a pick 6 that was a backbreaker, and that's the kind of thing that if you're from the LSU side, you look at Nussmeier and you go, all right, man, like it's a different kind of challenge this week. You better be mindful of it.
Yeah, but it's one of those situations where if Oklahoma's been vulnerable in one place, it's against the pass on defense, and especially the big play. And I feel like even though you may not have the Malik Neighbors and the Brian Thomas, those guys can still create some big plays in the passing game. And Garrett Nussmeier is a good enough quarterback to find those guys down the field. It's just a matter of, can Oklahoma avoid some of the mental miscues in the secondary and keep everything in front of them, not let those guys create big plays behind them.
Has it been, so the secondary issues, has that been more lack of dudes, or is it assignment?
It's some of it is just an assignment situation, just kind of forgetting or not having enough consistency out there on the field at cornerback. There's been several injuries at corner throughout the year, but some of it is guys just forgetting. Against Missouri 2 weeks ago, they let Luther Burden just kind of run free down the sideline. And yes, there was some over the top help, but the underneath guy didn't really offer much in the way of underneath help on that throw either. And it allowed them to create a big play. So it's a little bit of both. Some of it is they still need to develop the talent to be able to compete at cornerback in the SEC. Their best cornerback right now is a former 3-star true freshman. Wow. He's just been standing out. I mean, he's a really good player. Yeah. So that's part of it. But the other part of it is they got to raise the talent base at cornerback as well.
What's happened there, John? I know the answer at LSU. Why? Like defensively, it's the same. Like there's just not NFL guys on defense. Why has that happened at OU?
So at OU, I mean, coming out of the Alex Grinch era, there was a lot that they had to retool and rebuild along the defense, and they really focused on the defensive line. And you're seeing that that's coming to fruition. They got the big portal win in Dominic Williams during the offseason.
We remember.
Yeah, LSU fans, Texas
LSU wanted bad. Yeah.
Dejon Terry came over from Tennessee in the portal the previous offseason. And even though he's not been a big name, he's not putting up big flashy stats, he really helped solidify the interior and start to transform that. And then they added Jayden Jackson, the 4-star prospect out of IMG Academy. He's a true freshman, and he is every bit of the player that everybody hoped he would be. I don't think anybody expected he'd be that player in year 1 for the Sooners. The defensive line has really started to take over. But then you've got guys like Danny Stutzman at linebacker and Billy Bowman at safety that were Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch recruits, but they stuck around with Venables and then have continued to develop. So there are some NFL talented guys on the defense. It's just at cornerback, they're just not quite yet where they need to be, but they've got some guys with big time potential that could be that. It's just they're not there just yet. Still need to develop at cornerback for sure. We're going to get into some keys for the game coming up here on Locked On LSU and Locked On Sooners.